Greetings. My name is Barbara Ann Lambert. I came to teach in Powell River in the 1960s. I came, I stayed 50 years. So why? I fell in love with Powell River, an isolated mill town on the Sunshine Coast with 2,500 mill workers. I fell in love with a tall, handsome farmer, Stuart Lambert from Paradise Valley. After I retired from teaching, I lived full-time in Douglas Bay. I researched and wrote local history books. My latest book is In Paradise, Wolves at My Back Door, and it is number 9. Part 1, Memories. 1966, crossing Canada by Greyhound bus, coast to coast. 1940s, childhood memories of World War II. 1950s, living in an English castle. 1960s, in the British Army in West Germany during the Cold War. Part 2, Townsite. 1915, living in the shack, Tom and Gertie, and baby Stuart. Townsite memories, Frank Haslam, Joyce Morris. The story of the Powell River Pulp and Paper Mill, 1911 to 2023. Part 3, Paradise Valley. 1910s, Loki Locomotive Logging in the Valley. 1920s, Tom Lambert, owner of the largest goat dairy in the Dominion of Canada with 100 milking goats. Part 4, my story, a farmer's wife. The many adventures of living on a Paradise Valley goat farm for 3 decades, including wolves at my back door. Part 5, last chapter, beautiful, beautiful Douglas Bay. Crossing Canada. Excerpt. Due to a rail strike, I crossed Canada coast to coast by Greyhound bus. I boarded the bus going west with 1 change of clothing and a toothbrush. So I started the long journey across Canada by Greyhound bus. Crossing Canada by air is a long journey. Crossing Canada by train is even longer. Crossing by bus is a really, really long journey. Vancouver passenger was told, stay on the bus. Do not stop anywhere to spend a night at a hotel. Keep on going. Because the strike had now hit the rest of the country and thousands of CN passengers are waiting at every bus station across Canada to board a bus to their destination. My very first experience of the prairies was endless fields of wheat, mile after mile, hour after hour. I kept wondering, where are the towns? Where are the cities? Where are the people? I had come from a country 40 times smaller than Canada. Going from really small to really big is overwhelming. It was the timelessness and endlessness of the prairies which remains even today my main experience of crossing Canada on a bus. It had its own breathless beauty in a forever time zone. As I crossed Canada, I had flashbacks to my childhood in the UK during World War II. Excerpt, Childhood Memories, World War II, 1939 to 45. Yes, we have no bananas. There were no bananas in the British Isles for the duration of the war, 6 very long years. The day I was born at the beginning of World War II, my father was in the back garden digging an Anderson air raid shelter, a shelter made from corrugated iron and named after Sir John Anderson. My father worked as a signalman on the railway. It was a reserved occupation. Dad worked 12-hour shifts. We rarely saw him. It was a dangerous job as rail lines and signal boxes were primary targets for enemy bombers. The British railways were the major transport link throughout the country, moving troops, mail, food, essential goods for the war effort. Personal travel was discouraged. My mother was a stay-at-home mother because she had 2 young children under the age of 5. Women worked in bomb and airplane factories, joined the women's forces, worked on the land as land girls. Women replaced men on the home front as the male population was on active duty overseas in the armed forces, the Army, Air Force, and Navy. Fortunately, we lived in the country, in a small Yorkshire village in northern England named Guiseley, population 1,000. My parents rented a newly built row house, 85 Fieldhead Road, on the outskirts of the village. Upstairs, our house had 2 bedrooms, a box room, which was a storage room, which was my bedroom, and a bathroom. Downstairs were 2 rooms, a sitting room and a kitchen with a small pantry. No freezer, no refrigeration, no washing machine, no dryer in our modern 1940s house. Without refrigeration, food had to be shot for on a daily basis and cooked the same day, or kept overnight in the larder to be cooked the very next day. Canned goods were rationed. It was a treat to obtain a can of Canadian salmon. Our kitchen was a typical wartime kitchen, row after row of empty shelves. Food was so scarce that every food item was consumed soon after it was purchased. Milk, cheese, and eggs were kept in the pantry on a marble slab. A small outside window let in cool air in the evening and kept food overnight without spoiling. The coal fire in the living room heated a back oven in the kitchen. Coal was rationed. Most homes in the 1940s were heated by coal. With the exception of bread, fish, fruit, and vegetables, everything else was rationed: food, clothing, coal, petrol. At the butcher's shop, liver, kidneys, and tripe were off-ration. Off-ration food was in scarce supply. Due to the war, few fishing boats were venturing out to fish due to the presence of enemy submarines. Everyone had a ration book. It had coupons in it. As children, we had the responsibility of doing the daily shopping and queuing up at the individual village shops, such as the butcher, the baker, the fishmonger, the grocer, and the greengrocer. Village streets were noticeably quiet. One saw the very young and the very old. The only traffic on the roads were bikes and public transportation. With petrol rationing, the few privately owned cars were put onto blocks for the duration of the war. The average weekly ration per person was half a pound of sugar, 6 ounces of margarine, 4 ounces of sweets, 2 chops, and 1 fresh egg. Yes, 1 fresh egg per person per week. The government encouraged everyone to grow a Victory V garden, as vegetables were needed as to supplement our diet. As a small child, I worked on our Victory V garden, weeding and harvesting. Taking care of the Victory V garden was a family affair. We kept chickens and rabbits. It was made quite clear to me by my parents, rabbits were meat rabbits and not to be petted. Our butchered rabbits were bartered for sugar to make blackberry jam, for clothing, which was in short supply. Enemy bombers came over our village to bomb the industrial towns of Bradford and Leeds. The sirens sounded as soon as enemy aircraft were observed on the coast. We were taught to take cover in a ditch, under a desk or table, or a nearby air raid shelter until the all-clear signal sounded. After the all-clear signal we just carried on. Our wartime slogan was, keep calm, carry on. Christmas during the war was simple but joyous. I remember my Christmas sock, my 1944 Christmas sock. In it were a few hard-boiled sweets, one chocolate bar, a few nuts, an apple, a new shiny penny, a knitted scarf and gloves, a new knitted outfit for my doll, and a Rupert the Bear book. I was thrilled. For Christmas dinner, we had root veggies from our Victory V garden, potatoes, carrots, onions, and beetroot. Instead of a chicken, turkey, or goose, we had a tasty rabbit stew with a crust on top. Dessert was Jell-O and a piece of Christmas cake made with carrots. There was no dried food. A delicious spread. June the 8th, 1945. VE Day. Victory over Europe. I walked with my family and the entire population of Guiseley Village 5 miles to a large bonfire burning on Otley Moor. Victory fires were lit all over the British Isles. It was a centuries-old tradition to signal from coast to coast a national victory. For me, growing up in wartime was the only life I knew. It was normal to carry a gas mask, dive into a dish if the air raid siren sounded. It was normal to keep calm and carry on. Yes, we had no bananas until the war was over. Then, one day, when shopping out of school with my sister Joyce, we saw a long queue outside the greengrocer's shop, and across the entire window, in large whitewash letters, was a notice. Yes, we have bananas. Now we knew for sure the war was really over. Part 2. The Townsite. Tom and Gertie Lambert living in a shack in the Townsite, 1914 to 16. In part 2 we meet Andrew McKinney, Tom and Gertie Lambert, Joyce Morris and Frank Haslam. Excerpt. Tom worked on the Powell River Company docks from 1914 to 16. He was a teamster, working 6 days a week, loading rolls of paper onto sailing ships with a team of horses. After the last shift of the day, the large Shire horses were escorted by the Townsite children to a nearby barn. Andrew McKinney, a businessman, had a 100 lease agreement with the Powell River Company. McKinney was a distant relative of the Brooks family and had been invited to Powell River with his family to operate the Powell River Hotel. Andrew's wife, Barbara McKinney, was Gertie Lambert's aunt. Tom, Gertie, and their baby son Stuart moved into a shack behind the hotel a few months after Stuart was born, in Vancouver, February 1914. Gertie was busy on a grand scale, baking powder biscuits for hungry Italian construction workers in Powell River's tent city, mixing the dough in a tub with a large shovel. Gertie was an enthusiastic amateur photographer, owning a Kodak box camera. The film was developed and printed in the photo and art shop located on the ground floor of the hotel. McKinney's Hotel was an upscale establishment in the Powell River Townsite. It had 30 rooms for out-of-town guests. Hotels in frontier towns were known for their wild drinking, gambling, brawls, and loose women, where hotel rooms were rented by the hour. Last drinks in the Townsite were taken at 11 p.m. By midnight, all was quiet as a mouse in the company town. 1920, the Powell River Company docks became fully mechanized. They no longer needed to employ teamsters. By 1926, The company had a fleet of 400 vehicles. Excerpt, Frank Haslam, 1911. I came to the Townsite with my parents, Samuel and Mary Haslam, in 1911. We lived at 160 Maple Avenue. I attended the second school in the Townsite. The first school in Powell River was held in a pool room in a one-room bunkhouse for 5 months in 1911. The second school was built where the Anglican church is now, on a lot set aside by the company for a school. I remember a room upstairs for the bigger kids and a basement for the smaller children. Mr. Buckton was the principal. Excerpt, Joyce Morris. Ken Pauling worked for the Powell River Company pulp and paper mill and played in a local band. He played on a number of occasions for the Papermakers' Ball in Dwight Hall. Irene Pauling was offered work in the mill as part of a female workforce for the duration of the Second World War. Irene capped rolls of paper in the company mill. Joyce married William Bill Morris. Bill worked for Macmillan Bloedel, and when he retired, he was a mill superintendent. Joyce worked for the BC Telephone Company in the Townsite. She worked the last shift at the Townsite location before the office was relocated to Westview in 1964. Part 3. Loki Logging, Paradise Valley, 1911 to 1918. Logs were brought out of the valley by Loki Logging to the Tidewater camp of Bloedel, Stewart and Welsh at Myrtle Point. Even today, as you drive past Myrtle Point, you can see the remains of a Tidewater camp. There was a railroad going up through the valley exactly where the road is today. After the fire of 1918, when the valley was burnt out, the rails was taken up and moved to Duck Lake. Why was the road called Paget Road? The Paget family homesteaded sheep in the valley. Why was the valley called Paradise Valley? Have you ever wondered why Paget Road is so narrow and twists and turns through the valley? The road bed is a railway track. How did Paradise Valley get its name? Let's ask Tom Lambert. Excerpt. The 1918 fire not only changed the land but gave the valley its name. The place was a mess. Blackened trees, stumps and spars everywhere. One could not take a step without sinking ankle deep into black charred wood. One day in the 1930s, Tom Lambert remarked to his neighbour Mrs. McQuarrie he thought the place looked like a scene out of hell. So with great humour, they decided to name the valley Paradise. Tom Lambert and his wife Gertie established in Paradise Valley the Myrtle Grove Goat Dairy, the largest goat dairy in the Dominion of Canada, with 100 milking goats. In 1941, after the death of Tom Lambert, the farm was inherited by his two sons, Stuart and Russell Lambert. The farm was renamed the Lambert Brothers. Part 4. Powell River and Paradise Valley. I arrived at the Westview Dock August 1968. I came, I stayed, I never left. So why? I fell in love with the tall, handsome farmer Stuart Lambert, who farmed 80 acres in Paradise Valley. He farmed of goats, cattle, and 2,000 chickens. I was a teacher, Stuart a farmer. Yes, we fell madly in love, married within 6 months, however, knew zippo about each other like nothing. On our honeymoon in Victoria, I had a sucker punch shock while having tea at the Empress Hotel. Stuart remarked, "As soon as we get back to Paradise Valley, I will teach you how to milk a goat." Wow. We quickly came to an agreement on the spot. I would be the teacher in the family, Stuart the farmer, case closed. And it worked. I had many adventures on the Lambert farm. Goats in my kitchen, wolves at my back door, mice on the Comox Ferry, one-legged chickens, an escaped prisoner, a lost child, a visit by the RCMP bomb squad, etc., etc., etc. Life was never dull living at the Lambert farm. So let's start with a very short story. Mice on the Comox Ferry. Occasionally, Stuart used his old blue truck to travel to Comox to pick up feed at the feed store. The old truck was rusting away as it sat out in the yard near the chicken barn in all elements. It was never undercover. One time, mice moved into the camp for the winter. They left seed like poop everywhere. It was pretty obvious to me they were living in the truck. Stuart ignored the mice scurrying around in the camp of the old blow truck when he drove it back and forth on the Comox Ferry. Back and forth went Stuart on the ferry. Back and forth went the mice on the ferry. Back and forth went Stuart on the ferry. Back and forth went the mice. They never, ever paid a fare. Kid goats in my kitchen, Eenie, Meenie, and Mo. I was making supper in the kitchen one evening in springtime when I saw Stuart coming up the farm track, carrying triplet kid baby goats under his arms. He temporarily placed them on some old sacks on the linoleum underneath the kitchen table, then returned for a second trip to the barn to bring up a bucketful of the mother's milk for bucket feeding her kids. Triple goats, unlike twin goats, need bucket feeding. Too many mouths for two udders. One kid always got left out, and it was usually the same one. So the triplets were bucket fed in the farmhouse. They lapped up the milk by sticking their heads into a milk bucket. Where to put them? We had a big box TV in the living room, and in the basement was the cardboard box it had come in. Perfect. For nearly a week, the triplets, named Eenie, Meenie, and Mo, stayed in the big TV box. Soon they were getting bigger and stronger and more curious to see the world outside the box. In this case, it was the kitchen and the living room. One by one, they jumped out of the box and trotted around the kitchen, jumped on chairs from there to the kitchen to the table. Next, they discovered the living room when the door was left open accidentally. Up they went, jumping on furniture, prancing everywhere, and leaving bullet-like poo and puddles of urine on the floor. One morning, I had a word with Stuart before I left for work. The triplets, Eenie, Meenie, and Mo, must go back to the barn. They were turning our house into a goat barn. Yes, it would be extra work for Stuart to do the bucket feeding in the barn, so I was ignored. The kids continued to have the free run of the entire upper floor. By now we had a very smelly rug in the living room, so I went into action a couple of days later. Using my teacher voice, I announced to Eenie, Meenie, and Mo, the time has come to go to the barn and meet your real mother. Let's go. I picked up two, one on each arm, walked them down to the goat barn, went back with Singleton. Next step, clean the farmhouse floors. Yes, Brillo paths worked just great to get the goat poo off the kitchen linoleum. The rug was shampooed. All back to normal. Until the next time. Story: Wolves at My Back Door. One very cold winter's evening, a very hungry wolf pack came down from the back country, looking for easy pickings from farms in Paradise Valley. It had been a particularly hard winter, and the wolves were desperate for a quick, easy meal, a chicken or a goat. Stuart was the first to hear them. He briefly opened the back door and gestured for me to join him on the doorstep of our farmhouse. We stood there. It was a clear night. The stars were shining in the inky black sky. We could hear the wolves howling nearby. It was an eerie sound and echoed around the valley in the frosty air. Ooh. Ooh. Yes, I had wolves at my back door. For 1 millisecond I saw the yellow eyes flash in the dark woods just a few feet away. The very next day, a neighbor phoned to say a wolf had been seen dragging one of our old goats into the bush near the goat barn. Stuart checked the goat herd. One was missing. Other farmers throughout the valley had a missing stock. All the chickens in Mrs. Rumley's hen house had disappeared. She had heard her dogs barking in the night. It was not until the next morning she found the chicken coop completely empty, except for a few feathers. The wolves continued to stay in the valley. At night we heard them howling, an unforgettable sound. It was a chilling sound. Even our dog stopped barking. Stuart now packed an ancient rifle with him everywhere he went. He was determined to shoot the wolves. At night he kept the rifle outside our bedroom door, just in case it was needed in a hurry. More stock disappeared. Strange things were happening in our big chicken barn. Chickens were found with only one leg. It was a puzzle. The wolves continued to stay around. More chickens with one leg. We had 2,000 chickens in the chicken barn. They were perched on an upper level floor made of wooden broomsticks a few inches apart. This allowed the chicken poo to drop through the slats to the dirt floor below. Soon, Stuart solved the mystery. The wolves were coming down at night, digging their way below the broomstick level where the chickens perch. The wolves were able to get inside the chicken barn, reach up and snag a hen by one leg. However, they were unable to pull the rest of the hen out, as it was far too plump to go through the narrow broomstick slats. Hence, we had chickens with one leg, and the wolves had a drumstick. One night, Stuart decided to stake out the barn. He sat on an old kitchen chair with his rifle by his side. Nearby, he had staked a dead chicken directly in his view. He was ready for action. This was the night he was going to take dead aim at the wolves, scare them away back to the back country. It never happened. Stuart slept throughout the night. The dead chicken had vanished by the time he woke up the next morning. Not a wolf inside. The local newspaper, the Town Crier, ran a front-page article on the incidents. Wolves take drumsticks. Eventually the wolves moved out of the valley. All was quiet again. I shall never ever forget the winter I heard wolves howling at my back door. Ooh. My favorite story. The cat came back. Princess, our house cat, had been asleep, curled up on the bed with Stuart in our downstairs suite at the farmhouse, when fire broke out. The smoke awakened Stuart. He started to violently cough. He staggered up the stairs, opened the back door, and gulped in the life-saving fresh air. Neighbours and the fire department quickly came by. Stuart was found, somewhat bewildered, sitting on the doorstep. He was just about to get up, return to his bedroom to find his socks. However, a kind neighbour drove him to her home for a hot chocolate, a piece of cake, and loaned him a pair of men's socks. Stuart the very next day went to view the damage to the farmhouse and to look for Princess. He looked and called for her. "Princess, Princess." No Princess, no sign of her. I assumed she had died in the fire. Stuart was convinced she was alive, and for 4 long months, while the farmhouse was being rebuilt, Stuart left out food for her every single night. The first night back in our newly rebuilt farmhouse in late November, all the lights were on. We were sitting in the living room. I heard a cry outside. I raced down to the bottom door in the basement. I quickly opened it. I stepped outside and called, "Princess, Princess." I heard more crying, and I called out her name again. "Princess, Princess?" Yes, the cat came back. A very slim princess, but alive. I raced upstairs to tell Stuart the good news, with Princess purring in my arms. "Stuart, the cat came back." We both cried with relief and joy. She was back home. She quickly lapped up a saucer of warm goat's milk. That very first night, when we slept in our newly painted bedroom with the ensuite bathroom, Princess joined us and curled up in the middle of the bed. She purred all night. Good night, Princess. We love you. Part 5, Douglas Bay. Looking back, Douglas Bay, 1895-1975. Cattle ranching, cottage rentals, sale of waterfront lots. Excerpt. Employees of the Hastings Mill Company and their families lived in cottages around Douglas Bay. It was only a short walk along from the Lang Bay logging operation to Douglas Bay. The same cottages were used by a succession of logging company employees. 1895, Thomas Rue preempted land in the area. Brew Bay was named after him. Thomas Brew drowned in the bay in the 1890s. He was buried on the foreshore of the property, and I know where he is. 1899, William and Isabella Kelly lived in a cottage at Brew Bay. William worked for the Hastings Mill Company, which had its main camp at Lang Creek. 1900, Isabel Kelly homesteaded 160 acres in Brew Bay. The area included Kelly Creek, Kelly Point. In 1910, Isabella renamed the bay Douglas Bay after a relative. Cattle roamed the property. Edith Flynn, quote, "Old Mrs. Kelly used to go around with a revolver in her apron pocket. Anyone she thought was acting suspiciously, she pointed at them and ordered them off the place." Edith Flynn. Mrs. Kelly wrote to Texada. At this time, there was no Powell River. She wrote to Texada from her farm in order to get supplies. She launched her boat from old railroad tracks near the beach at high tide in Douglas Bay. In the 1920s, Walter and Hannah Patrick owned recreational property in the bay. Walter worked for the Powell River Company. The Patrick farmed the area and kept pigs and sheep. During the 1930s, the following owned recreational property: Len Donkersley, Marge McGilvery, Nora McQuarrie, Sid Patrick, Walter Patrick, Bert Pritchard, David Stanley, and others. Quote, Carol Pritchard. Bert and Irene Pritchard had many parties in their summer house in Douglas Bay. In the winter time, there were skating parties on the Land Bay farm property. 1940s, Thomas Lang rented, then purchased in a tax sale, the old Kelly property. Part of the Lang farm included a 1920 Crown grant to Thomas Lang. He was a returning soldier from the Great War. (1972), Tom and Pearl Lang sold a 14-acre field with 400 feet of waterfront to Lambert, Palmer and Williams. The area was subdivided. In 1975, Ed Milnick purchased a waterfront lot from Barbara Lambert. Price $20,000. During the last 50 years, from 1975, there's been a number of changes in Douglas Bay. Residents of the bay continue to enjoy the beautiful sandy beach and the wildlife in the area. Epilogue: a view from my window. For the last 20 years, Douglas Bay has been my home. I see the incredible sunrises at one end of bay in the morning, and in the evening at the other end of the bay, a small glimpse of the brilliant red sunsets over Westview and Texada Island. There is a timelessness of living in Douglas Bay, watching the tide go out and come in, seeing the rippling sand which seems to stretch out forever before reaching the sand dollar zone at low tide. Wildlife call the bay their own: screaming gulls, eagles on the eagle tree, herons standing on one leg on the sand in the incoming tide, black bears and deer eating crab apples in my backyard. In direct contrast to the vivid blue skies and the barking of dogs on endless summer days are the high winds, storms, and giant king tides in the spring. Beach logs come alive in the 100k winds and high tides. They jostle around like matchsticks in the heaving, churning water, crashing against each other over and over again. Yet, the next morning, all is calm, all is quiet.